Welcome back to the misadventures of the space hobo, the Scottish Highlander, and the girl. Yes, we've gone back to the Troughton era of Doctor Who, and this time things get serious. We start with Tomb of the Cybermen, where Team TARDIS lands on the planet Telos, not to be confused with Talos from Star Trek. This planet is one of the places the Cybermen colonized after the Doctor blew up Mondas and thwarted their attempts to attack the moon. And apparently it's been dormant a long time. He and a group of archaeologists, led by a guy who works for the Brotherhood of Logicians. That's logic magicians, I guess. And they managed to figure out a way to get to and thaw a bunch of frozen Cybermen, including one type that's never been seen before up until now, a cyber controller, who looks like a regular Cyberman, but has a big bullet head with a sort of a glowy brain attachment instead of the headphones that Cybermen usually have. Also, the team discovers cybermats, these little metal caterpillar things with bulgy eyes and nasty looking little teeth that are no doubt more dangerous than they look. Especially in some of the scenes in this adventure, because they are nasty. Anywho, as it turns out, this whole thing was a trap. The various booby traps, which claim a couple of lives along the way, and the means by which the team enters the facility, they were tests to get clever individuals close to the Cybermen, because they're looking to cyber convert people. There were threats of cyber conversion before, but this time they mean it. They want to rebuild their race by capturing humans who are clever enough to get to them through the booby traps. And basically they're going to use their long dead planet Telos as a staging area to try to take over Earth again. And the worst part, this guy who funded the research, the logician guy, he and his female partner funded the research which led to this expedition to try to gain control of the Cybermen to take over the world, of course. But they quickly find out that Cybermen will not be controlled. Cybermen control, or they're destroyed by the Doctor. There's also one tragic character, an African-American fella who doesn't get a lot of lines. When he does speak, it's kind of slurred, and when people speak to him, they speak as if he's simple-minded. This poor fellow, who was the servant of, well, manservant of the female assistant, or partner in crime, whatever you call her, he was supposed to be semi-deaf. At least that's what it said in the script. And yeah, they didn't mention that, and it does not come across like he's partially deaf. It comes across like he's something of a simpleton. But the real tragedy is he gets partially cyber converted, and when the Doctor manages to reach what little humanity he has left, you can see that in this guy's expressions that he is going through some serious pain. Like, you could see the tragedy of what cyber conversion does to the human mind. So kudos to the actor for pulling a pretty decent performance despite getting hardly any lines and sort of getting the short end of the stick when it comes to certain aspects of his character. Ultimately, the Cybermen are defeated and refrozen and locked away forever, hopefully. And the survivors barely make it out, along with Team TARDIS, who leave in the TARDIS, of course, to their next adventure. Oh, also, this episode is something of a soft reboot for the show, as it takes place immediately after Evil of the Daleks, and the fires of the Civil War from the previous episode can be seen in the distance of the opening shot, as the Doctor consults his 500-year diary and says how old he is and tells Victoria, the new girl, everything about the TARDIS. So it's a good starting point for people who want to get in on the series, but who can't access the early episodes. Anyway, on to the next adventure. The Abominable Snowman, which sadly is mostly missing. There's, I think, one episode that's intact, and the rest are a few clips and telesnaps. But basically, the episode is there thanks to loose canon, and hopefully someday the missing episodes will be animated. Anywho, the Doctor has taken a bell from a Tibetan monastery back to this monastery after a couple centuries of it not being there. And they end up coming across the remains of a camp run by this cantankerous scientist who wants to prove the existence of Yeti. And he's managed to make friends with the local Tibetan monks, the same monks that the Doctor is returning the bell to. And sadly, he thinks that the Doctor might be responsible for hurting his team. But no, it was the Yeti that did it. Only they're not actually Yeti. They look like Yeti, these big, bare, grimace things with oversized heads and barely discernible features on their faces. But really, they're robots, controlled by these metal spheres that beep. And what's controlling the spheres, you ask? Something called the Great Intelligence, this Lovecraftian horror from the outer universes. And it's taken over the leadership of this monastery. But luckily, the monks who aren't loyal to the intelligence, the scientist guy, and Team TARDIS, work to thwart the Great Intelligence. And this is a battle the Doctor almost loses because it's a battle of the minds. And the Great Intelligence is evil, so he's intrinsically inferior to the good Doctor. But it is a difficult fight. They barely manage to get to the Intelligence's inner sanctum and break his devices which connect him to this universe, which ultimately win the day. And there's even a bit of resolution for the scientist guy because he sees a real Yeti, which is actually timid and sort of runs off. So he gleefully chases after it. And that's pretty much it. Basically, the Doctor versus another super being that's intangible and very scary at times. Hopefully we'll get to see this episode, or this serial animated someday, because we lost a lot of good material when this when this serial was junked. Next, the team end up in the far-flung future during a second ice age, where a group of scientists are using ionization technology to hold back glaciers from the few areas of the Earth that aren't frozen yet. And the scientists also have to lock horns with with a group of anti-technology primitives who are really, really annoying. And then another monkey wrench gets thrown in. They find strange, giant humanoids encased in alligator skin armor with clamp-like hands that seem to be pre-Viking, and they're dubbed Ice Warriors. Of course, no one's seen the movie The Thing, so they decide to thaw the creatures out. Bad idea. The electrical current they use ends up reanimating one of the creatures, who proceeds to basically be a bully. He's going to take what he wants from them, wreck their stuff, kill some of them if he wants to, resurrect his buddies, and he just is really a jerk to Victoria, who, after going through what she's been through with the Daleks and the Cybermen and the Yetis, this is just piling on more negative experiences. And the creatures that are menacing her and everyone else, they claim to be from Mars. Yeah, it's Mars Attacks, Doctor Who style. Anyway, luckily the Doctor is able to use his knowledge of ionization technology and being sort of a passive nemesis character and maneuvering pieces all over a chessboard, metaphorically speaking, to save Victoria, save Jamie, who almost dies when he and another guy get shot by the Ice Warriors' sonic weapons. Yes, they have sonic weapons. And he even saves the scientists and one of the primitives who decided he didn't want to be a primitive anymore, and ultimately thwarts the Ice Warriors. And everyone is now fed up with the TARDIS not landing properly in places and landing in cold climates. They just want to go somewhere warm. So the Doctor takes them there. Specifically to Australia in, of all times, 2018. Now, I lived through 2018, and I'm pretty sure Australia didn't look like that. It was called the Australasian Zone. They really, really missed the mark when they interpreted what 2018 would be like, especially since some of the characters were using Luger-type firearms and really weird-looking rifles. But what they did get right was everyone was paranoid about terrorists. And technically being a post 9/11 time, they sort of got that right. Excuse me. In this world, there's overpopulation and not enough food to go around. So yeah, they got that right too. And here comes this philanthropist named Salamander, Latin American, who, yes, looks exactly like the Doctor and is played by Troughton. He built various technologies to help feed starving masses and offers aid to victims of natural disasters. And he tries to predict those natural disasters so he can rise to the challenge of helping those in need like that. But as it turns out, he's a bad guy. He wants to take over the world, of course, by using a bunch of young eggheads in an underground bunker, and a natural disaster generation machine. Basically, he creates natural disasters in order to destabilize various world governments in order to get more and more control over the world. And everyone is suspect of everyone. Everyone's stabbing people in the back. It's almost like the Mirror Universe. And wouldn't you know it, once again, the one black character dies. Oh, I failed to mention in the previous adventure, yeah, the dude died, but he died a heroic death, and so does Faria, the female African American character, who is forced to work for Salamander as a food taster because he might get poisoned one day. Ultimately, she gets gunned down by bad guys, but her last act in the living world is to smack one of the chief underlings. She went out like a boss, and I hope she was reincarnated as Martha Jones, because I think that's something Martha would have done. Ultimately, the plan involving the doctor, when he shows up and gets mistaken for Salamander, is to impersonate Salamander to help take him down. Of course, some of the people involved in this plan actually want to kill Salamander and take his place. No one here is completely innocent. And to top it all off, excuse me, Salamander nearly gets away in the TARDIS. Luckily, he makes a fatal mistake. He motions for Jamie to control the TARDIS and get them underway, but he was told never to touch the TARDIS controls. And for the first time ever, we get to see the Doctor confront his doppelganger. And it is a pretty flawless shot. Even when the Doctor and Salamander are face to face. Ultimately, Sal also makes a equally fatal mistake of talking about killing the Doctor when he should have just gotten on with it. Because Jamie was able to knock him out of the way, get the TARDIS started up, and since its doors were open when it took off, bad things happened. Salamander was sucked out into the time vortex, and nearly so were the Doctor and company. Luckily, in the next episode, they managed to get the TARDIS under control and land in the London Underground, which was portrayed so perfectly that that people who worked in the London Underground and denied the production access to the actual underground complained that the Doctor Who team violated the don't film in the underground rule. Turns out they were all fooled. Anyway, it's 40 years after the incident in Tibet, and the Great Intelligence is back. It manages to get control of an old Yeti robot and reconfigures it into a more combat-ready configuration. And basically, the Great Intelligence floods the London Underground with this sinister toxic foam stuff. They call it a fungus, but it's more of a foam. And it gives the Yetis ranged gas weapons, which spew poisonous gas and cover people in webs. And that's where the episode gets its name, Web of Fear. Honestly, I like the Mark II Yetis better because they're more intimidating and they look more like an actual creature, not just a suit. Also, they have a roar which is really intimidating. This is where the British military really shine, even more so than when they went up against the war machines. And in uh, episode 3, which was lost after being found again, unfortunately. So it was recreated using telesnaps, which I was worried about because, that's hit and miss. But this telesnap recreation of episode 3 was really good, surprisingly. Anyway, in episode 3, we're introduced to one Colonel Lethbridge Stewart, who was the future brigadier and future leader of UNIT, which, according to my mom, was an actual thing. And still is. Anyway, um, the Brigadier's team and, well, the future Brigadier's team and the Doctor's team hook up and meet up with the cantankerous scientist from the previous adventure, who is now 40 years older, crotchety, and has a daughter who's a grown-up. And basically they have to work out how to defeat the Ray Intelligence, because at one point they find a piece of equipment that was the Achilles heel of the Intelligence. They destroy it, and it doesn't work. And it's ultimately because the Great Intelligence has upped its game, has better machinery, and wants a sort of revenge on the Doctor, although it denies it wants revenge. He wants to take over the Doctor's mind, just suck all the information out and leave him a babbling idiot. And he very nearly this is where my tongue stops working, and he very nearly does. Although, unbeknownst to him, the Doctor fiddled with the machinery before surrendering himself to Yeti control. And the Doctor's plan was to suck out the Intelligence's mind. Although, I'm not sure what would have happened at that point. Would he have become the Valeyard early? Who knows? But thanks to the misguided Jamie and Zoe, who use a Yeti that the Doctor had reprogrammed earlier to attack, they stop the Doctor from completing his task. Oh yes, they defeat the Intelligence, but they don't destroy it. They just defeat it. And ultimately the Intelligence survived. But the day is won. A lot of good soldiers have died heroes. This one guy who really got under my skin, he was basically a driver for a truck, but he was supposed to be a soldier as well. He did not act like a soldier. But anyway, on to the next adventure. Sadly, this is the last Doctor Who adventure that's intact, mostly. The rest are done with telesnaps and audio recordings, but hopefully they'll get animated one day, such as Fury from the Deep, which I think is scheduled to be animated once the BBC is done with the Faceless ones. This one takes place on a natural gas mining rig in the ocean, and it's also the episode where the Doctor introduces us to the sonic screwdriver, which can pretty much do anything, and in his first outing with it, he uses it to turn a screw. Yeah. Also, the screwdriver is basically a pen light with some dubbed over sound effects. Anyway, the team ends up on a mining rig where something strange has happened. They're mining natural gas, and they've also started getting flooded with this weird foam, which the Doctor and company played with earlier. There's also this seaweed that's been seeping in. Turns out it's some sort of semi-intelligent creature, and it can turn people into zombies which spew poisonous gas. A lot of the surviving clips of this serial are censor clips that were deemed too terrifying for audiences. And yeah, what we do get from this episode, or well, series of episodes, is pretty intense. Which is why I think that's why they're going to animate it next. And even though they figure out that Victoria's screams are what hurt the creature and they ultimately defeat it and save everybody, Victoria has just had enough. All the running for her life and being scared all the time, she just wants it to stop. So, she decides to stay with a married couple, which the Doctor and company have met earlier in the episode. And yeah, this is Victoria's last episode. Ultimately, it's just Jamie and the Doctor now in the TARDIS, flying off to their next adventure in the Wheel in Space. They end up on a derelict starship with only one occupant, a maintenance robot, which is shaped like a cremains urn, or possibly a martini shaker, depending on your point of view. Unfortunately, the TARDIS, something breaks on it. The mercury fluid link starts evaporating, and basically the Doctor and Jamie have to bail out, removing a component which turns the TARDIS back into a wooden box. Otherwise, the mercury vapor would have killed them. And luckily, their ship is headed to a space station called the Wheel in Space, where they can get mercury and fix the TARDIS. Unfortunately, something has infiltrated the ship. A collection of what look like ping pong balls, which are actually eggs, which proceed to infiltrate the Wheel in space. And those are revealed to be eggs. Some of them hatch to reveal Cybermats, and a couple of them transform into Cybermen. Anyway, the Cybermen have a plan involving blowing up a star, which will cause an asteroid field to collide with the Wheel. Meanwhile, the crew of the Wheel, distracted with the asteroids, don't notice the Cybermen infiltrating the Wheel. And the Cybermen are going to take over some of the inhabitants and kill the rest, and use the Wheel as a staging area to try and invade Earth again. But when one of your plans involves blowing up a star, you might need to rethink that plan. Anyway, after being introduced to the crew and having to sabotage a few things to avoid the TARDIS getting blown up by the Wheel's X-ray laser, which did manage to destroy the asteroids, thankfully. They end up meeting Zoe, a very, very smart girl who honestly ends up engaging in some semi-naughty wordplay with Jamie, but it was the 60s, so it was more innocent back then. Ultimately, the Doctor is deemed a worthy threat by the Cybermen's cyber controller, so they try to destroy him. He manages to thwart them. They manage to blow up the Cybermen's spaceship that's only seen once, but it kind of looks like a metal cigar. And basically, It's a whole lot of running around, and Zoe wearing the spacesuit that is worn by Bosk, the lizard guy from Empire Strikes Back, and basically outwitting the Cybermen one more time. And this episode, while mostly gone, will hopefully be someday animated because it's a very important episode. It's immediately followed by a rerun of Evil of the Daleks, but it's incorporated into the show. The Doctor projects images from his mind onto a screen, so Zoe, who snuck aboard the TARDIS right before it took off after the Cybermen were defeated, can see what she might be up against if she decides to join the crew. So kudos for incorporating reruns back in the day. And that's it for this season of Doctor Who of the Troughton era. When next we meet, there's going to be more Cybermen, a lot of reality bending, and the Doctor ends up getting in over his head. In over his head. See you for the last season of the Troughton era. And remember, this is Mr. J signing out. Remember, recorders are cool, and so is the Brigadier.